Why did my mother sabotage my wedding makeup because she couldn't handle me looking better than her? My mother has never once told me I looked beautiful without adding something right after it that took the compliment back. I used to think that was just her personality, a weird nervous habit, until my wedding day, when I finally understood it was something else entirely. I hired a makeup artist named Elaine 3 months in advance. I sent her photos, we did a trial run in April, everything was locked in down to the exact shade of blush she'd use for the ceremony versus the slightly deeper one for photos under the tent lights later. My mother kept asking why I needed someone outside the family when she'd done makeup for years, back when she used to do her sorority sisters' faces in college. I told her gently that I just wanted a professional for something this big, that it wasn't personal. She smiled and said, "Okay, that's fine. Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart." I should have known that smile meant something, because my mother's smiles were never just smiles. The morning of the wedding, Elaine texted me at 7 a.m. saying she was so sorry, but she'd come down with food poisoning overnight and physically could not drive. She sounded miserable in the voice memo she sent, apologizing over and over, saying she'd already called 2 other artists to try to find me a replacement before I even asked, and she gave me the name of a backup artist she trusted, a woman named Teresa, who could be there in an hour. I panicked for about 10 minutes, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed still in my robe, and then just accepted it, because what else do you do 4 hours before you're supposed to be at the altar? My mother showed up to my hotel room with a giant makeup case I didn't even know she owned, the kind with 3 fold-out trays and a strap across the top. She said Teresa was running late and she'd start on my base while we waited. I was stressed. I had 100 things happening at once. My aunt was steaming the dress in the bathroom. My sister was arguing with the florist on the phone about centerpiece flowers that hadn't arrived, so I just sat down in the desk chair and let her. She used a foundation shade that looked slightly off to me in the mirror, more orange than my skin tone. But she kept saying it would even out under the ceremony lights. The cameras always shift color anyway. Don't worry about it, honey. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. I trusted her because she's my mother. Why wouldn't I? Teresa arrived 40 minutes later, took one look at my face, and got very quiet. She set her kit down slowly, almost carefully, like she didn't want to make noise. She asked who did my base coat. I said my mom, just to start. We were waiting on her. Teresa didn't say anything bad. She just gently said she was going to build on top of what was there rather than strip it since we were short on time and she'd make it work. But she kept glancing at my mother the entire time she worked. This careful, guarded look I didn't understand until much later, like she'd seen this exact situation somewhere before. I didn't see the full result until I put my dress on and stood in front of the 3-way mirror in the bridal suite. My skin looked muddy in a way that didn't match the rest of me. My under eyes looked gray, and next to my mother, who had done her own face flawlessly, contoured and glowing, standing right beside me in the reflection, I looked washed out and tired in every single photo from that day. My photographer even pulled me aside during cocktail hour and asked, so gently, if I wanted a few shots redone with different lighting because something felt off with my color balance. I said sure, not understanding yet what was actually off. It wasn't until the reception that my great-aunt Carol, 3 glasses of wine in, grabbed my hand at the dessert table and said something that stopped me cold. She said, "You look just like your Aunt Diane did at her wedding." Poor thing. I asked what she meant, my stomach already tightening before she even answered. Carol's face changed, like she realized she'd said too much, and she waved it off. Said, "Never mind, sweetheart, it's your day. Let's not talk about that now," and squeezed my hand. Like that was supposed to be comforting. I let it go that night because I had 100 other things pulling at me. My husband's grandmother crying during the first dance, the DJ running out of slow songs, my mother giving a toast that somehow mentioned herself 11 separate times. But Carol's comment sat in the back of my mind for the rest of the night like a splinter I couldn't quite reach, showing up every time I caught my reflection in a window or a phone screen. 2 days later, back from the honeymoon, still jet-lagged and barely unpacked, I called my mom's older sister, my Aunt Diane, who I hadn't spoken to in years because of some falling out nobody in the family ever fully explained to me. I just asked her straight out, "What happened at your wedding?" There was a long pause on the phone, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Your mother did my makeup too." I sat down on my kitchen floor, still holding my phone, still in my travel clothes, suitcase not even unpacked yet, and I said, "Tell me everything." She started to. She got about 4 sentences in, mentioned a foundation shade, mentioned a photographer who'd asked the same exact question mine did, mentioned the word pattern like she'd used it before to describe this to someone else. Maybe more than once, maybe to more than one person. And then her voice caught and she said, "Actually, I don't think I should be the one telling you this. There's someone else you need need to call first. She wouldn't give me a name. She just said I'd know who once I asked the right person the right question, and that some of this happened before I was even born, back when my mother was younger than I am now. I hung up, sat on that kitchen floor for a long time, and opened a new text message to my mother. I typed out 4 words and stared at them for 10 full minutes before I hit send. What happened to Diane? 3 dots appeared on my screen almost instantly, like she'd been waiting for someone to finally ask. My mother had just texted me back, "We need to talk in person," after I asked her what happened to Diane. Instead of setting up a time with her, I called my dad. Not because I was avoiding my mom, but because my dad is the only person in this family who has never once lied to me about anything, even the small stuff, even when the truth made him look bad. He asked me to come over alone. No husband, no sister, just me. When I got there, he was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee already poured, like he'd been expecting this call for years. He didn't ease into it. He just said it, flat out, like he'd rehearsed the sentence 100 times and wanted to get it over with. "Your mother didn't ruin Diane's wedding. Diane ruined something of hers first." I asked him what that meant. He asked me if I knew my mother had been engaged before him. I didn't. Nobody had ever told me that, not even once, not even in passing at a family dinner. He said her name was Marion, that she'd been engaged to a man named Robert for almost 2 years back in the 70s. 3 weeks before that wedding, Diane told Robert something about my mother that wasn't true, something about her being unfaithful with a coworker. Robert believed it without ever asking my mother directly. He called off the wedding through a phone call to her father, and by the time my mother found out what had actually been said, the invitations were already coming back in the mail, one by one, each a fresh humiliation. I asked my dad how he knew all this, if it happened before he even met her. He said my grandmother told him years later, right before she passed, because she wanted someone in the family besides herself to know the real version before it died with her. He said my grandmother believed Diane made it up out of jealousy because Diane had liked Robert first and lost him to her own sister and never forgave her for it. She carried that secret for decades, watching her daughters drift apart, never telling either of them what she knew. I sat there trying to make the math work in my head. My mother young and humiliated, abandoned 3 weeks before her wedding because of a lie her own sister told. I asked my dad the obvious question. Does that make what she did to me okay? No, he said, clearly, no hedging. What she did to you and what she did to Diane at Diane's wedding, that's its own thing, its own choice. Nobody made her do it except herself. But he said I needed to understand something. My mother had spent her whole adult life believing that the second any woman in her family looked like she might have something good, somebody would find a way to take it from her, because that's exactly what happened to her the first time it mattered. He told me one more thing before I left, something he probably shouldn't have been telling me, but he was tired of being the only one holding it. He said after Diane's wedding, when Diane confronted my mother about the makeup, sobbing, humiliated, wanting to know why her own sister would do that to her, my mother didn't deny it and didn't apologize. She just said, "Now you know what it feels like when someone takes something from you that was supposed to be yours." That's the line Diane has carried around for over 30 years word for word. It's the reason the two of them have barely spoken since, exchanging maybe a handful of stiff phone calls a year, always around the holidays, always short. I left my dad's house and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before I could make myself drive home. I wasn't defending what my mother did to me. I still felt sick every time I thought about my wedding photos. The muddy foundation, the way I'd looked tired and gray next to her glowing face in every single shot. But for the first time, I understood that I wasn't the actual target. I was just the closest available version of a wound that had never healed, standing in a white dress on the one day my mother's own dress never got worn. I called Diane back that night, not my mother. I told her everything my dad had said and asked her if it was true, if she'd really told Robert that lie all those years ago. There was a silence so long I thought she'd hung up. I was 22, she finally said, and I was in love with him too. I have regretted it every day since, but that doesn't make what she did to me at my own wedding fair. 2 wrongs, she said. That's all this family has ever been. 2 wrongs, passed down like a family recipe nobody wants but everybody keeps making, generation after generation, nobody ever brave enough to be the one who just stops. I asked her if she thought my mother would ever actually own any of it, out loud, to my face, without turning it into a story about herself. Diane laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Honey, she's been rehearsing her version of this since before you were born. Whatever she tells you tomorrow, it'll be a version where she's still the one who got hurt. She was right. My mother showed up at my house the next afternoon with a plate of banana bread like this was a casual visit. She sat down at my table, and before I could say a single word about Robert or Diane, she looked at me and said, "I just want you to know I did the best I could with what I was given." I didn't yell. I didn't cry either, which surprised me. I asked her directly if she'd done my makeup on purpose, knowing it would look wrong on camera. She got very quiet, turning her coffee mug in slow circles without drinking from it. "I didn't plan it the way you think I did," she finally said. "I just couldn't make myself let it be perfect. Like some part of me needed you to know what it felt like, even a little, even for one day." I asked her if that part of her had felt satisfied, watching me look at those photos later, realizing something was off and not knowing why. She didn't answer that one. She just looked down at the banana bread, untouched, cooling between us on the table. My mother didn't answer whether she'd felt satisfied watching me stare at those wedding photos, and for 3 days after that, I didn't push it. Until Diane called me and said something that changed my mind. "Two wrongs," Diane said. "I told you that already. I meant it as a warning, not a shrug." She said if I let this die at the kitchen table with the banana bread, my mother would fold it right back into her rehearsed version, the one where she's still the one who got hurt. Diane said she was tired of being a footnote in a story my mother told herself, and if I actually wanted something different for myself, I couldn't do it quietly. She had to be in the room. I sat with that for a full day before I called my mother back. I didn't ask her to talk. I told her. I said Diane and I were coming over Saturday, together, and this wasn't going to be a conversation she got to steer. There was a long pause on her end, long enough I thought she might just hang up, but she said okay, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her. Saturday came, and my hands were shaking pulling into her driveway. Diane was already there, standing by her car in the same navy coat she'd worn to my wedding, arms crossed like she was bracing for weather. We didn't say much to each other, just a nod, and walked up to the porch together. My mother had the table set with 3 cups of coffee like the last visit, except this time nobody touched them. Diane sat down across from her for the first time in years, and I watched something pass between them that had nothing to do with words. 30 years compressed into one look. I started it because I knew if I waited for either of them, we'd sit there till dark. I said I wasn't there to relitigate the makeup or Robert or any of it piece by piece. I said I wanted to know why, every single time either of them had a chance to just say sorry and mean it, they chose a version of the story where they were still the victim instead. My voice cracked a little on the word victim, and I hated that it did, but I let it stand anyway. My mother's jaw tightened. She looked at Diane first, not me, and said, "You want an apology? Fine. I'm sorry for what I said to you after your wedding. I meant every word of it when I said it, and I've regretted meaning it every day since." Diane didn't flinch, but her eyes went glassy. She said, "That's the first time in 30 years you've said that without adding a single but after it." My mother opened her mouth like the but was right there, loaded and ready, and then she just closed it again and nodded instead, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug she still never drank from. Then Diane turned to me. She said there was one more thing she'd been sitting on, something she hadn't told me on the phone because she wanted to say it with our mother in the room. She said the year I turned 8, my mother had asked her to do my hair for a school pageant, and Diane had refused, point blank, no explanation given, and our mother had never forgiven her for it. Diane said now I'd understand why. She was terrified of becoming the reason something went wrong for me the way it had for her, of somehow being roped into the same pattern from the other side. My mother's face went pale, hearing that out loud, like she hadn't realized anyone else had been carrying the weight of what she does to people she loves, quietly, for decades, without ever saying it to her face until now. I asked my mother the question I'd been circling since the banana bread, not whether she'd been satisfied. I already knew the answer sat somewhere she couldn't fully reach, but whether she wanted to actually stop, not apologize after the fact. Stop, before it happened again, to my sister, to any daughter I might have someday. She didn't answer right away. She got up, went to the counter, and came back with an old photograph I'd never seen, herself at 24, in a wedding dress that never made it down an aisle, standing alone in a church hallway, her own mother's hand barely visible at the edge of the frame like she'd been cropped almost all the way out. She set it on the table between the 3 of us and said, "I have spent my whole life making sure I was never the only one standing in a hallway like this. I didn't know how else to do that except make sure somebody else knew how it felt." Diane reached over and took the photo, looked at it a long time, her thumb tracing the edge of it without meaning to, and said quietly, "You're not standing alone in a hallway anymore, Marion. You haven't been for years. You just never noticed anybody was still standing next to you." Nobody cried dramatically. It wasn't that kind of ending. My mother just nodded, slow, and said she wanted to try, actually try, to be someone who didn't need anyone else to hurt to feel like she'd been seen. She said it plainly, without performance, which for her might have been the most honest sentence I'd ever heard come out of her mouth. Diane reached over and, for the first time since I could remember, put her hand over our mother's on the table, just for a second, just long enough to mean something. Before Diane left that day, the 2 of them made plans to get lunch the following week, just the 2 of them, no audience, no anniversary or holiday forcing their hand. My mother walked me to my car afterward, and, for the first time I could remember, didn't say anything to make the moment about her. She just hugged me, the plain kind of hug with nothing underneath it, and said she was proud of the person I'd turned out to be despite her, not because of her. I drove home with that old photograph sitting on my passenger seat. She'd handed it to me before I left, said she didn't need to keep it hidden in a drawer anymore. I called my husband on the way and told him everything, and he was quiet for a while before he just said he was glad I finally had the whole picture instead of pieces of it. That night, I put the photograph in a frame and set it next to my own wedding photos, the muddy foundation and all, because both of them were true, and for the first time, neither one felt like something I had to protect myself from.